My name is Greg Hildebrand, and this is my audience.
Dad, back to me. This is me. I've seen that. But most of this.
When one thinks of a veteran of World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, something along the lines of bravery and courage might come to mind. One might even shed a tear or place one's hand over one's heart when thinking of a soldier that can endure so many wars and still come out victorious. Most people think of Douglas MacArthur in that same way because he proved himself as an impressive war general and war hero. But does he truly deserve this recognition? While many historians view him as an outstanding Army officer, many of his actions do not represent those of an upright or even decent human being. Many even consider him the type of person who tried to accomplish his own ends and not put his country first. It stands widely known that MacArthur changed the world as people see it, but the public does not know whether the world changed for the better or for the worse. Douglas MacArthur became a hero by winning a couple of wars and therefore the hearts of the American people. Many do not know about the atrocities he committed even against his own fellow Americans. After becoming a well-known figure in the Army, he married Louise Cromwell, a daughter of a prominent government official. However, the marriage only lasted a couple of years and ended with a divorce bearing no children. Although no one understands why the marriage ended like this, one might infer that MacArthur's attitude problems played a role. D. Clayton James, somewhat of an expert of Douglas MacArthur, had this to say about him. In personality, MacArthur was enigmatic and contradictory. To many, he seemed imperious, aloof, egotistical, and even pretentious. It seems as though MacArthur loved what he did for a living, and his attitude reflected that. However, his attitude would put his career in danger a few years down the road. After MacArthur sued a radical journalist for publishing some controversial material about him, the journalist Drew Pearson did some digging and found out that MacArthur had a Filipino mistress while married to Louise Cromwell. After Pearson threatened to go public with this information that undoubtedly would ruin his career, MacArthur unwillingly dropped the civil suit against Pearson. Jason Tatkenhorst, a historian, had this to say about MacArthur's attitude. He was set in his ways. No one was going to tell him different. That sounds like an attitude problem to me, and he will not accept compromise. Refusing to compromise would become a problem later in MacArthur's life. During World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a general at the time, had this in his journal to say about MacArthur. He complains about a lack of unity, a lack of command, and a lack of information. He's jittery. Other journal entries of his said similar things. It seems like these journal entries revealed a lot more about MacArthur than what actually meets the public eye. Between World War I and World War II, MacArthur became Army Chief of Staff in 1929. No one knew it at the time, but the Great Depression was about to begin, and along with that, MacArthur had many other worries that needed his attention, including a catastrophe called the Bonus Army. In June 1932, in the midst of the Great Depression, thousands of ragged veterans of World War I massed in Washington, D.C. to petition Congress for early payment of their war service bonuses. Camped with their wives and children in a miserable shanty town, they were set upon by tanks, 4 troops of cavalry with drawn sabers, a column of steel-helmeted infantry with fixed bayonets, all led by MacArthur. He sought to justify this action by contending that he narrowly averted a communist revolution. This is a picture of Bonus Army veterans camping out in front of the Capitol. Since the Great Depression began just a few short years ago at this time, the government became short on money, and they could not give the bonuses due to the veterans. This, of course, made the veterans very angry, so they marched on Washington, not unlike the Freedom March, which Martin Luther King Jr. and his fellow African Americans made later on. This peaceful march of Bonus Army veterans turned out to be unsuccessful, and MacArthur's actions during this public relations disaster became very controversial. Jason Tatkenhorst had this to say about the calamity of the Bonus Army. The whole Bonus Army fiasco was not dealt with in a professional way. Several high-ranking officials and military leaders of the 40s and 50s were involved. I would say his actions should be questioned. It became a catastrophe ending the lives of World War I veterans who risked their lives for us overseas. As shocking as this tragedy seems, other events of MacArthur will soon overshadow it as the most controversial of actions he performed. As World War II began, it kept MacArthur very active. He made some very contentious decisions throughout the war, but in the end, MacArthur became the hero who forced the Japanese military to surrender in 1945. He then stayed in Japan to oversee the stabilization of the Japanese army and to ensure Japan became a democratic country. He also headed the organization that sentenced Japanese war criminals. During that time, MacArthur ordered the execution of Tomoyuki Yamashita, a well-known and liked figure in the Japanese community. The government did not approve of this at all. This deed became exceedingly criticized by various people, including some of his own Americans. Also, throughout that time, the U.S. and the USSR agreed to divide Korea into two parts, North Korea and South Korea. They divided the country at the 38th parallel, and North Korea aligned with the USSR, and South Korea associated with the West. Around the time MacArthur started to head back to the States, North Korean forces attacked South Korea, intending to conquer the rest of Korea. This created additional problems for MacArthur, which he had an aptitude for attracting. After the North Korean attack on South Korea, President Truman named MacArthur head of the United Nations. With this all-encompassing power, MacArthur landed on the southern end of Korea Peninsula with his army ready to combat North Korean forces. At first, MacArthur and his military drove back North Koreans, even past the 38th parallel. When they pushed North Korean forces back almost to the Chinese border, MacArthur became smug, and in his arrogance, he told his troops that they would be home for Christmas dinner. He did not even consider the fact that North Korea's communist ally, China, might respond with a counterattack. Even though the Chinese warned him about such a counterattack, the arrogance of MacArthur led him to believe that they would not attack or the Allies would crush them. He even told the president personally that the Chinese would not dare to provoke the United Nations in such a way, for fear of annihilation. Contrary to what the general thought, or even what anyone else thought, massive Chinese forces nearly wiped out a South Korean force near the Yalu River on the 25th of October. Even as no one thought the Chinese would do such a daring thing, Chinese forces drove Allied armed forces all the way back to the 38th parallel. This is a picture of Korea, and it shows the 38th parallel, and that they divided. North Korea aligned with the USSR, and South Korea aligned with the West.